Good evening. Tonight's story tells about a man who is obsessed with books. His obsession takes on sinister aspects when he decides to broadcast his thoughts to others through the medium of the podcast. It's not a medium I'm familiar with personally, as I've been dead for 45 years. But I understand they can be popular with people of a certain disposition. We'll find out more about this man and why he decided to take a break from his hobby after a quick word from our sponsors.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Hello and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the final season. We have a lot going on in this week's return episode, so let's get right to it. You've already heard Jim Sangster in the intro. Coming up next, a song by Jim Sangster related to Delta and the Bannermen, followed by my interview with Melvin Pena, first-time guest to the show, well-known in the Doctor Who podcasting sphere. Then my analysis of Delta and the Bannermen, the novelization. I apologize in advance for the audio quality in that segment. It does jump around all over the place. I am hopefully going to be replacing my podcasting microphone in the very near future. And then we end with another Jim Sangster production, a sneak preview of what is coming up on Doctor Who Literature, the final season. Let's get to it.
Bannermen, 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 Bannermen. Standing by a spaceport gate, have we got here too late? Doesn't seem so. Aliens head for holiday. Where they from, did they say? Never really know. All they wanted was a Disney trip, but a satellite caused a blip, and that's when things got odd with Ken Dodd. A woman with a terrified face, she's the last of her race. She's a Shimmeron, on the run from a deadly gang. Just be glad they're not Kangs. They're the Bannermen. All she wanted was a little soul. What she got was good old rock and roll. And now she's come so far, Shangri-La.
My guest today is somebody I've been meaning to get on the show for a long time, but his rise in the podcasting sphere has been so meteoric that in between my thinking to have him on the show and have him on the show, he has now been on every podcast that matters multiple times. In terms of podcasts, he has been on the Pyramids of Mars of podcasts. He has been on the Blink and Midnight and Turn Left of podcasts. He has been on the Remembrance of the Daleks of podcasts. And you know what this show is, Melvin Pena? This is the Mutants of podcasts, all right? The production values are lousy. The acting is terrible. There's some good ideas in there, but the episodes are 2 episodes too long. So thank you very much for momentarily lowering yourself back down to join me, my friend.
You could put it that way. You could also say this is the Dominators of podcasts. So, and you know, Fraser Gregory of the Trap One family, is absolutely crazy about the Dominators.
Oh my word!
Even if it's the Mutants, there's always going to be a Fraser Gregory out there for whom that is their favorite story / podcast. So it's a pleasure to be here. A long time coming. We actually have a missing episode, which I have addressed on another podcast. So this literally is not the first time, but hopefully this one will stick. So thank you, Jason.
I was planning to do a mini advent calendar season in December 2024, but your episode, my power was out that day, so I had to record on my phone rather than the laptop, and the end result was absolutely unusable. And that season, for a variety of reasons, never did launch. And speaking of Fraser was on the first iteration of Doctor Who Lit about 10 times, including my Dominators episode. So anybody who knows this show, the first thing you think of is Fraser talking about the Dominators.
Yes. So let's keep it at that level and go from there. But yeah, no, I'm thrilled to be here. I've wanted to do this for a long time. So one of the ways that I knew what you were saying about me entering the sort of in an anime sense, when you're in like one of those high school anime where you're entering the high school world for the first time, was listening to one with you and Ross talking about me being on a future episode of his podcast. And I'm like, wait a second, people are talking about me on podcasts that I'm not actually on. It made me feel like I was part of the community. So we've definitely got that going.
And now you are one of Ross's regulars, so it's a great place to be.
Me and him and Jeff do the regular sort of episode reviews, or did for the Shooty era, and that was one of the great pleasures of my life.
Yeah, that was one of the first places I would go to gauge my reaction to a particular Shooty episode to see what everybody else thought, because I was watching it at home in a vacuum, and I wanted to hear. So you on Gallifrey's Most Wanted and the Doctor Who show from Australia, those are the two places that I would go to get my instant hot take input as to how the Shooty episode landed for people.
That's a very fair spectrum that you would get then, because Ross and Jeff and I, and then the guys on the Doctor Who show, like there's a wide variance of opinions there. So like that's a good sort of like seesaw to sit on when you're thinking about like what are your initial reactions.
And I should also give a shout out to Trap One. I did host several Shooty era Trap One episodes, but when I host, I try not to inject my own opinion. I rather try to ask perhaps pointed questions, but I'm more interested in hearing what other folks think. So what we're talking about today, Melvin, is the 1987 equivalent of a Shooty Gatwa story, Delta and the Bannermen. And I can say this because I was there on Records Doctor Who in the early 90s. Delta and the Bannermen was despised, loathed, and detested when it first came out. And I think fandom has finally joined me in appreciating the value of this story. There's a lot of different things happening in Delta and the Bannermen all at once, and they don't all connect up with each other. I think the end result is 90% genius and 10% cringe, which is good because in the 1980s, the prevailing take on the story was 10% genius and 90% cringe. So where do you come out? When did you first see Delta? What was your immediate reaction to it? And how might you have evolved on Delta and the Bannermen as a TV serial over the years?
These are great questions, Jason, and I think I may stun you into silence here, because I mentioned on the pre-show that I rewatched it last night. I think I may have seen this once before, and it may have been, I want to say, probably about 10 years ago, and it must not have made a very big impression on me, because I have now listened to the book a couple of different times, because this is our second attempt to record this. So I've listened to it, and this was maybe about half a year ago, I want to say, that we had originally scheduled to talk about this, maybe 5-6 months ago,
before my 10-month hiatus, which was quite unexpected for all parties. But yes,
yeah. So, but the thing is, like, I've now heard the novelization a couple of times and have a lot of thoughts about the relative strengths of that story. When I rewatched Delta and the Bannermen last night, I'm afraid that like my opinion was very similar to what you were saying about the original like broadcast sort of fan reaction. Like I was a little bit shocked at how poor, like how sort of basic, how sort of almost juvenile the televised story was. Again, having heard the novelization a couple of times now, and the novelization is about 4 hours long. The TV version is 3 episodes, sort of 20. I would say 25 minutes because that's what it says on BritBox when you watch it. But I mean, the beginning of episodes 2 and 3 is sort of the recap of the end of episodes 1 and 2. So it's very, very like the way the story plays out to me is a bit like a précis for a Doctor Who story, or like a story outline. Because again, having read the story, the novelization a couple of times, it was really sort of shocking to me how thin and bare the televised version was, and how sort of like, I don't want to say sort of amateurish. So those are sort of my initial impressions. Like I wish I had years of televised viewings of it to draw on, and I feel like I'm gonna probably let. You were talking about Trap One a minute ago. The major domo of Trap One, Mark McManus, who I know is a massive fan of the Sylvester McCoy era, and I've got my Sylvester McCoy, Paul Burley, Badge Wolf Etsy pin on Redbubble. I mean, I do love Sylvester McCoy, and I gotta say, shout out to Sylvester McCoy, who was filmed. I don't know if you caught this on the internet this weekend, Jason. He was at the protests for our president, which I'm putting that in scare quotes, hashtag not my president, protests in London this weekend, being interviewed by BBC News, who apparently didn't realize who they had on screen. And he was as doctorish as I believe I have ever seen him. And I wanted to take back every awful thing that I've said about every Big Finish performance he's almost ever given, with the exception of Unit Dominion, which is one of my favorite, and maybe the first Big Finish box set. I'm not a massive, and this is the thing, Big Finish has sort of made me not a massive Sylvester McCoy fan, but I'm very bullish on him these days. So again, that's a lot of info. I want to give you a moment to like object and reply, as it were, in the Cartesian method.
I will say that given the quality of mail that I received from people who discovered the show during the hiatus, and given the advice of my producers that Doctor Who Lit 2.0 stay away from American party politics.
Can't help it. This story is steeped in it.
I will see that you're going to get me in trouble with my audience right from the get-go.
Sorry, guys. Can't help it. This story, like I would have gotten there even if Sylvester McCoy had not been interviewed. Like the Man in the Street. I love a Man in the Street interview, and I love it when it's It just happens to be Doctor Who.
And the reporter was so young, did not realize that the Man on the Street was the former star of one of their flagship shows and a Peter Jackson repertory actor from the Hobbit movies.
Yes.
Which were, even though they were perhaps more misbegotten than The Lord of the Rings, those movies did tremendous box office. So it's not like Sylvester McCoy is exactly a lightweight.
Not exactly a lightweight.
No.
And the crazy thing is, having now seen and refreshed myself on Delta and the Bannermen, there are scenes in this TV story which have odd echoes in his appearance in The Hobbit.
So I will get into my thoughts on the book after the break when I do my 10-minute review of the novelization. I had the novelization as it came out in 1989, and I had not yet seen any McCoy on television at that point, except, of course, for half of Time in the Ronnie, which I've talked about elsewhere.
Yes.
I loved the book as I first read it, because the idea of a Doctor Who story set in Disneyland in 1959 was a wonderful idea. Mm-hmm. And even though I didn't know what a quote-unquote holiday camp was, I think Shangri-La is not dissimilar to the Catskills holiday experiences that I had in the late 80s with my families, the old Catskill hotels, the Jewish Catskills. So I understood sort of where the story was getting at. And when I did see the TV serial for the first time, when PBS here got around to showing it in 1990 or so, I was very disappointed in the production values. But I'm going to defend Andrew Cartmel and the McCoy era. It is not just that Delta and the Bannermen is the one poorly made story out of the 12. To give a shout out to my recent appearance on the Battlefield episode of the Target Doctor Who Book Club podcast, the production values in the late 80s, because of the elimination of the budget and the overuse of OB camera, the entire McCoy era, any story shot outdoors, the production values are fan video plus. I mean, they're very cheaply made.
Really rough, Jason. Very, very rough.
And that applies to Remembrance of the Daleks and Curse of Fenric as much as it applies to Delta and the Bannermen and Happiness Patrol. So this story has a great cast. You have Don Henderson, who was in the original Star Wars, and then his character had an interesting afterlife in the recent comics. And you have Stubby K. My parents, growing up as New York City theater kids in the 50s, I was raised on Stubby K. So getting him in a Doctor Who episode was a tremendous thing for me. But yeah, I was the first time out disappointed in how cheap the transformation Navarino arch effect is. I
did love the giant purple guys, though. That was awesome.
I was disappointed in I had never heard of Ken Dodd, and I didn't know that his appearance was controversial, but I was disappointed in the performance that he gave the first time out. And I was just disappointed in the very cheap and flimsy look and feel of the thing. But as I've watched it over the years, I appreciate the story more and more. And I'm hoping that when I have you on for the Geezer reunion episode of Doctor Who Lit in 2035, maybe you'll have come around on the story.
I mean, hopefully I will have watched it a couple more times, but and again, it's not all bad. I mean, again, like story matters a lot, and I get that Remembrance of the Daleks, like the same sort of film technology is used, but Remembrance of the Daleks is very clearly a superior story narratively, and like just in the way that the way that characters and storylines are given time and weight and room to develop. Whereas again, it really feels watching Remembrance of the Daleks, watching Delta and the Bannermen, that you really are just sort of, someone just said, okay, film these story points. Because a lot of the TV story feels like the Doctor arrives somewhere, shouts something at somebody, and then drives away. And I'm like, it just like, it's so bullet point the way that it's filmed. Or the way that it, not necessarily again the way that it looks, but the way that it's put together. No one really gets more than a couple of lines, and it really does sort of feel like they filmed an outline of a story more than the story itself. And to defend a little bit of the sort of like special effects stuff, the little infant, the little weird creature when it pops out of the egg, that's one of the most fantastic things I've ever seen in Doctor Who. And I'm like again, the way that stands out in the sort of triumph of the special effect of the little puppet creature, it really like puts everything else around it under like a very unfavorable microscope. And again, the purple creature Navarinos, they go through the chameleon arch, and it looks really awful. But again, the creature effect looks really cool also.
But you only see it for about 0.75 seconds.
And so again, that it really reflects poorly on everything else.
So I had another question to ask, but you had your hand raised when I mentioned Stubby K, so I think I want to circle back to that.
Yes. So the thing is, like for those of us who, or for those listeners who aren't super familiar or don't want to go rummaging through the IMDb page. So Stubby K played, is that Hawk? Is that correct?
He was Weissmuller, the guy.
Weissmuller, that's right.
He was wearing both the New York Yankees cap and the New York Yankees jacket, in case you couldn't get the point. And Melvin, I am, of course, you had mentioned on another podcast that you don't like podcasts that take 10 minutes to get to the meat. And of course, that was correct. Doctor Who literature to a T. We always take 10 minutes. So this new version of the show cuts out those 10 minutes. And thanks to you for that. But I will point out that I was at a New York Yankees baseball game last night, and Stubby K was most definitely not in attendance, having passed away 30 years ago.
Yes, and I will take up that stray strand and mention that my parents were at the exact same game. It's completely bizarre, but a nice dovetail for today's episode.
What section were they sitting in?
That I don't know off the top of my head. They love going to that ballpark. It makes them feel like, and I get it. Like it's just such a great place to watch a ball game.
This is Oriole Park at Camden Yards in my former hometown of Baltimore, Maryland. But I was in section 65, and I am sure they were probably sitting in the same section. That's how it always goes. You always sit at them right next to the exact same person you never thought would be there in a million years.
Well, again, and but we can dovetail this back into our discussion here, because one of the things about the episode is that, and it is actually consistent between the TV version and the novelization, is that the Hawk and Weissmuller characters, we're going back to 1959, as you mentioned at the beginning. Like this is the time that we're supposed to be like that when America was supposedly great. And so one of the amusing things about these characters is that we get sort of like 3 removes of time in this story, both in the novelization and in the TV version. So we're set in the far future, right? That's where we begin. That's where the Navarinos are from. They're traveling back in time to 1959, and the TV story airs in the late 80s. So we have like 3. It's one of the things that, regardless of which version of the show, of the story you're talking about, this is for me one of the most compelling things about the story in either version, is that we are looking at the time we go to, or the time we're visiting in the story time, through 3 different lenses. The lens of original broadcast, our maybe even 4 versions. When we are reading it right now in 2025, the 1980 sort of 687 version, and then the 1959 version. So like I just find that very interesting and very compelling, that the American characters are set up as, very clearly buffoonish. They've been exiled, but in 1959, like how wonderful is that? Like the cachet of traveling abroad, like alone would be wonderful, but they sort of see it as a kind of exile because they just want to get back to America, which they very clearly think is great at the moment that they're talking from. Because I think that's fascinating.
The CIA, we now know, was a lot more fumbling, stumbling, and bumbling in the 1950s than America was told by the media and by the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously America was caught short when Sputnik launches in 1957 and launches the space race, which America ended up winning in 1969 by getting to the moon first, unless you believe, of course, that the moon landing was faked and was staged by Stanley Kubrick in a film studio in the desert, as was later mocked in the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever. I do believe we got to the moon, and I do believe that America did win the space race. Sound off in the emails and comments. But more to the point, I think the reason the character is named Weissmuller is because of Johnny Weissmuller, the Olympian American athlete who later became Tarzan. I think the name is a loving homage. And since Stubby K spent a lot of time in London and was a stage star on Broadway here in New York and on the West End, whenever you cast Stubby K in a role, you're making that character sympathetic because he comes in with a certain cachet. Mm-hmm. So even though the characters are idiots, the Doctor gives them the satellite and gives them a win at the end of the episode.
Yes, they sort of fail upwards at the end, which is amazing also.
But in Remembrance of the Daleks, which aired after this story, obviously, once Andrew Cartmel had a steadier hand on things, but we're not going to get to it on Doctor Who Lit for a long while because the book comes out so much later. Every subplot in Remembrance of the Daleks is in furtherance of the same theme. Mm-hmm. The subplot about Mike and his racist mother, the landlady, and the subplot about Ratcliffe, and the subplot about the Dalek War and the mutant special weapons Dalek. All of those plot threads are in furtherance of the same point. So every scene in that story builds on the one before. Mm-hmm. And because it's a four-parter, there are a couple of sideshows and a couple of diversions, but even the scene with the guy from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air in the cafe talking about slavery and cane sugar, every part of that story is singing from the same book. Delta and the Bannermen, and this is the worst thing I'm going to say about it, no two actors or subplots in the story are on the same page. So to borrow from the Darren Mooney 250 podcast playbook, what is Delta and the Bannermen about for you?
That's a good question. I 100% agree with you in terms of the unconnectivity or disconnectivity of all the various plot points in the TV version. I feel like I don't have the book with me. Who is the novelizer?
The author, Malcolm Cole. And here's the book.
Malcolm Cole does a tremendous job fleshing out and connecting things to each other in the novelization. That is one of the reasons why watching the story again for the first time, maybe in 10 years, maybe ever, not 100% sure last night. If I have watched it, again, it was a long time ago. And the complicating factor there in terms of, narrative removes is that I might also have been on substances. So I'm not 100% sure that I've actually watched it before. But again, watching it last night, I'm like, wow, this is really disjointed because the novelization makes everything relevant, makes everything tie together in ways that are much more convincing than the TV story does.
Well, sir, it's this rug I have. It really tied the room together.
So one of the problems that I had enjoying Delta as a teenager who used Doctor Who as an escape and wanted Doctor Who to be an emotionally safe space. Up until 1987, well, no, I'll say up until 1985, up until Eric Sayward and the Colin Baker era, up until then, Doctor Who had a very rigid moral code. And you could look at a cast of characters in part one of a story. You could tell who is going to die in part one, who's going to die in part two, who's going to die at the part three cliffhanger, and who's going to live until the very last scene. There was a formula. I mean, anybody who is a mole, any character who is secretly working with the bad guys always dies at the part three cliffhanger. Ringway in Earthshock, for example, Kelman in Revenge of the Cybermen, Federico in Mask of Mandragora. Those are the top 3 examples that came to mind, but I'm sure there are more. Someone who dies in part 2 is a vivid character, but not very important. Somebody who dies in the first scene in part 1, obviously unimportant, like the guy in Terror of the Zygons. Then you have Harg, who dies at the part 2 cliffhanger of Power of Kroll. I suspect he was named for his character's death scream. The reason that he's called Harg is because he shouts Harg as he's being dragged into the pipes at the cliffhanger. So when you have Murray, when you have the Navarinos, and they are there as tourists, they're there to have fun, they want to go to Disneyland, and even when they don't get to Disneyland, they make it to a Welsh holiday camp. They make the most of it. The dance scene in part 1 is wonderful. McCoy with the guitar, the soundtrack. Then they are all killed off in the middle of part 2. And this is not your parents' Doctor. This is a dark show. And even in a fairly light episode, the murder of the Navarinos is one of the most disturbing things Doctor Who has ever done. And I'm not sure it belongs in the same story as everything else.
I definitely need to address that too, because again, the novelization goes to a lot more effort. And what you were saying, I thought you were heading in a different direction, because I thought you were going to talk about Keeler, the assassin, who, we often talk about, the 45-minute New Who format, especially when it first came back in 2005, as a sort of compressed version of the sort of 4-part Doctor Who story, where you get the sting right before the pre-credit sequence, and then and on and on. Whereas here, Keeler, the sort of mercenary, who I guess he's taking again, this is mostly from the novelization, who's sort of on a vacation from mercenarying, who happens to stumble onto a mark. 2 marks, because he's got the Shimmeron Princess Delta, and he can also probably get some cash for the Doctor. He realizes is killed at the beginning of episode 2, but the sting of the theme song at the end of part 1 is him holding up the Doctor and Delta in the sort of like supply closet. But he is sort of very unceremoniously killed at the start of part 2. But again, this sort of leads to what one of the things that you're talking about, which is one of the weird juxtapositions of this as a TV story, is this. And I have got to lay a lot of blame and a lot of really just sort of ugly thoughts at the feet of Kef McCulloch here, who is guilty of maybe crimes against humanity, if not crimes against Doctor Who, because you have this bizarre sort of 50s inflected sort of rockabilly soundtrack with the Doctor and Delta, or Doctor and Ray, basically like doing Benny Hill out into and out of every scene on this little scooter, which is, it's so comical as to almost be embarrassing, because like in between these sort of, again, Benny Hill, here we go, and there we go, kickstart the little scooter to leaves, kickstart, and then slowly pull into every scene. It's so weird that it's so that it's juxtaposed in almost every scene with something really visceral, and something really violent, and something almost needlessly and abhorrently violent, like people being atomized, including the bus.
If you are new to the classic series, if you are coming to Doctor Who having seen the new series first, and you want to know how good a particular Sylvester McCoy story is going to be, you ask yourself, who was assigned to be the incidental music composer for this story? If it is Kef McCulloch, or if it is Mark Ayres, it is going to be a very different answer. If it is Kef McCulloch versus Dominic Glynn, it's going to be a very different answer. I was on the Battlefield episode of Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast recently.
May I ask another question? Is that with the host Tony Witt? Is that
Tony Witt? Yes, good friend of mine.
Please continue.
But whenever I'm on that show, my job is to narrate the back cover of the Target blurb, and then Tony lays in incidental music from the episode to accompany. Then I said, look, you are setting me up, because I know that I'm going to have Kef McCulloch behind me drowning out the dialogue. So sort of like Garrett Morris doing the Hard of Hearing translation on SNL in the 70s, I was shouting the back cover blurb to be heard over Kef McCulloch.
Yeah,
that being
absolutely
said, this is my favorite Kef McCulloch score, because it is 50s inflected. And I grew up with my parents' 1950s records, and Kef actually appears in the episode. This is a much better Kef score than Battlefield, for example, or anything else he did.
Yeah. It's not that the music is bad. It's just that it's so discordant with the topic, with the content of the episode.
And I want to point out,
it's alarming.
And to point out about Keeler, Keeler is a sight gag because he's wearing blue suede shoes, which is one of the most lasting, famous songs of the 50s. However, when he says, I don't kill just for money. It's something I enjoy. And he's going to Disney. He thinks he's going to Disneyland. I was at Disneyland with my family last month. And it makes you wonder, as you're waiting online for Peter Pan, or you're waiting online for Pirates of the Caribbean, or the Matterhorn, or whatever great ride you have at Disneyland, how many other murderous mercenaries are standing in line behind you?
They're just there to have a good time. They're there as consumers. That's I was having a conversation with somebody recently. I'm like, I actually went to Hobby Lobby the other day to get a couple of art supplies because it was convenient. And I'm like, but I felt, and I won't go into huge detail about what I said, but keep in mind that Hobby Lobby has very certain specific political alignments. And I'm like, I felt like I was supporting some of their worst excesses. And my friend was like, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. I'm like, this is the thing, Jason, because there was, and this is a little bit off topic, but it's also sort of relevant to our discussion, that there was a wonderful Eastern North Carolina barbecue restaurant between where I live in the hinterlands of Raleigh, North Carolina, and Durham, North Carolina, beautiful downtown Durham, North Carolina, where I spend a lot of my time and money. And so there was again, it was attached to the side of a gas station, which, those are the best Eastern North Carolina barbecue restaurants, but they closed during pandemic. Obviously closed, but like closed for good, because there was a huge scandal about them making racist remarks on Yelp reviews. And so one of the things that I have come to realize since then, and this was already almost 6 years ago or 5 years ago at least, that I no longer have access to that food. And I'm like, I would go in there. And for your listeners who may not know, I am a Hispanic American male, Mexican American. One of the people who is sort of frowned upon by this administration. Neither here nor there. Both here and there is that if that place were still open, I would have a tacit agreement with them. If I could have their wood-fired pig meat, that I would give them a free one on the house every time I came in. They could call me whatever name they wanted, as long as I could have that barbecue meat. So again, no ethical consumption under capitalism, but we move forward with the fact that if I am providing you a service and you agree to act under the rules of the establishment, then we don't have a problem. So this is relevant to your Keeler discussion of Disneyland.
And because this is the new apolitical version of Dr. DWLit, I am not going to mention that Hobby Lobby traffics in stolen antiquities. Yeah. We're not going to mention it.
Also true.
So let's talk about things we like about Delta and the Bannermen. Let's talk about Garanwi. I am also a big fan of the Evolution of Horror podcast, and I'm just catching up.
Yeah, it's really good.
I'm just catching up on their 2024 season, and I just watched the movie Venom, which is it's a British film about a heist. It's the attempted kidnapping of the American ambassador's son, who happens to be a nature enthusiast and has a wide collection of reptiles. And he is inadvertently given a venomous black mamba snake at the exact moment the kidnappers are trying to invade his home. And instead of a kidnapping story, it becomes a loose cannon snake in the house, biting people in increasingly comically ironic ways. And it's a very bad film with a very prestigious. It is produced by Martin Bregman, who was Al Pacino's right hand and has his name on some of the greatest movies of the 1980s, and Venom. It is a movie that stars Klaus Kinski and Oliver Reed and Sterling Hayden's last movie, in fact. And it has Nicol Williamson as a detective, and it is a huge Doctor Who cast. It has cameos from Michael Gough, then it has Maurice Colborne, Pre Lytton, and it also has Hugh Lloyd in a very small but vivid role as the cab driver who brings the American boy to get what turns out to be a poisonous snake. So that was my first time seeing Hugh Lloyd in anything other than Doctor Who. And I didn't connect him until I got to the end credits, and I realized that was Hugh Lloyd playing Garanwi. It is a bad movie. I gave it 2 stars on Letterboxd. In spite of the cast and the producer involved in the shot and London filming, it is a weird movie, and it doesn't work on any level. But it does have Garanwi in it. Garanwi is one of the most interesting things about Delta, because for me, everything, unlike the rest of the story, which has 7 different subplots, everything he says is in direct furtherance of the main plot, which is
Yes.
Delta
Yes.
and the royal jelly and the
Yep.
evolution of Billy and Delta's daughter.
Yep.
I think Garanwi works very well as a character, and he, of course, gets the last word. He winks at the camera as we go into the closing credits.
Mhm.
Who do you think he is? Does he work for you? And would Doctor Who have been a better place if he came back to square the circle in season 25 or 26, reprising his role?
This is a cascade of excellent questions, Jason. Before I begin to answer that, I want to time check. Where are we at on the recording time?
8
Okay, so I've got a bunch of other stuff to say about the novelization specifically, but let me answer this question. Even though I was relatively unfamiliar with Delta and the Bannermen, I have been a Doctor Who fan long enough that I have listened to about 1,000 different podcasts about Delta and the Bannermen. So I'm very familiar with the what we call received fan wisdom that Garanwi is like a secret Time Lord. So I went into this with that expectation. And I don't really have a problem with it. I think it's fun. I think it's cute. I think it's great that he, in as much as he may be a secret Time Lord and, taking that as read, I love the fact that he has gone completely native. He's just completely, as Welsh as you can get, which I loved in the TV version, is that, the novelization, which again, I definitely want to talk about that specifically with the remaining time we have. But I loved that he had put on, if it was put on or what, adopted the Welsh accent, was completely native, made people feel welcome, whether they were the Americans or the Doctor and the Doctor and Ray, whoever it was that came to his place, he made them feel welcome. So I feel like there's something very explicitly rogue Time Lord about the fact that you go somewhere to a remote, and they make it very clear. Mel tells us in both versions, the novel and the TV version, that the Shangri-La, specifically that little camp, is grim. And the TV version, oh my God, Jason, watching that, I'm like, yes, that place does look like really. I may not be familiar with your Jewish Catskills camps, but I know, I've seen Sleepaway Camp a million times. My best friend Julia made me watch that movie once, and I'm like, that just feels like a 1980s place where people go to die.
Let me interject. There are a lot of movies about the Jewish Catskills experience, but the most famous one was shot in your adoptive home state of North Carolina, Dirty Dancing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I was at the Dirty Dancing Festival in Lake Lure right before the pandemic, 2019, and it was a marvelous time. But
it's a beautiful part of the state.
If you're eating at the Catskills, all the food is traditional Jewish, American, Eastern European imported food. Matzo ball soup, brisket, pastrami. None of the food trucks match the food that the characters would have been consuming in Dirty Dancing. And 0 bagels for breakfast, no lox. And I wanted to tell the organizers, you got to have the authentic food, but I figured that would have been churlish as a guest coming from far away. It was a great time.
Yep.
But that's, if you want the Jewish Cats experience, watch the movie Dirty Dancing. We have 6 minutes. Back to you.
Okay, so the next part is to go back to your answer, the question which you dovetailed that question into the series of questions, which was original question you asked me, which is, what did I make, or what do I think Delta and the Bannermen is about? And I don't want to let that one go, because I think what you were bringing out there in terms of the narrative ties is what Delta and the Bannermen is about. It is about, weirdly, it's about okay, this is going to sound like a weird answer, but it's about a Welsh guy a Welsh teen, right, who is obsessed with American rock and roll, transforming into an alien so that he can repopulate a planet, which it feels like a lot of weight to put on a guy, especially when the Doctor is sort of against trans species mogrification. I don't even know what the right word is there. He lets Billy know at the end. The Doctor's like, I don't know that this is right, that you should be eating this food and changing yourself into an alien so that you can personally be responsible for repopulating a planet. Which in the novelization, you see they go to the brood planet and there are all these empty matrix pods, basically pods from the Matrix, and you get the sense that Billy personally, his seed is going to be responsible for repopulating a planet, that is a bizarre thing for a Doctor Who story to be about.
I have 2 points in relation to that. Number one, in the Eric Sayward era, every story in season 22 features a horrific view of somebody mutating into another species. In Delta and the Bannermen, it is done with love and joy. Yeah. And Billy gets the happy ending the Navarinos did not get. Mm-hmm. Second point, I had the Nicolas Cage version of The Wicker Man stuck in my head because it is now what they could call spooky season in the States here for the kids. October is 10 days away. What happens to the male drones after they impregnate the queen bee in The Wicker Man or in real life? I hope Billy has a happier ending 5 minutes after Delta ends than would be typically true of
your general apiary. Yes, and we could talk about bees and pollinators forever. I highly recommend that all of our listeners go and listen to Melvin Bragg, who is one of my favorite sort of BBC presenters, has recently announced that he is stepping down as the host after over 1,000 episodes of the In Our Time podcast. There was one that came out, I just want to say, within this most recent season about pollinators. And I didn't think that, and I think he was Welsh. He might have been Scottish. It's been a while since I listened to it. This academic was talking about bees having feelings, and like the guy made me cry. I did not think that someone was going to make me cry about bees having feelings in a In Our Time podcast, which is generally like three academics talking about a specific subject.
So we're down to a couple of minutes. We have lightning round.
Yes.
Don Henderson, was he too one note, or was he not one note enough?
Oh, Gavrock. I mean, I don't understand what's going on with his eyebrows. Like someone waxed his eyebrows to be like Raleigh fingers, and I'm like, and him eating the meat was just disgusting.
Raleigh Fingers was the 1970s baseball player famous for a waxed handlebar mustache, which stayed waxed and curled in the middle of games, which is pretty impressive. Do you think Doctor Who might have been a better place in seasons 25 and 26 if Ray became the companion instead of Ace?
In the book, yes. The way she was played on TV, no.
And in terms of other subplots that we have not discussed, any other favorite characters we haven't talked about so far? Short answers only.
That's a good question. I don't know that it's necessarily interesting, but I do want to say with the remaining time that I have left, forgive me for hijacking, is that I want to give major props to, again, the gentleman's name who novelized.
Malcolm Cole.
It is an excellent prose novel. It is very pacey. It is very action-packed. Everything does connect in the book in a way it does not in the novel or in the TV version. And I need to give extra special shout out to Bonnie Langford, who does all of the voices on the audiobook. And really, like, you could tell that she, as opposed to, again, Sylvester McCoy when he does Big Finish, was extremely familiar with the prose when she sat down to read, because she gives an incredible performance. She does all the voices in all of the accents for all the regional dialects. And really just like, even though the book is 4 hours, the audiobook version, like it is absolutely like unputdownable in terms of the way that she performs the book. So like, I want to give major props again to the novelist and to Bonnie Langford, because they did a absolutely tremendous job. I recommend the audiobook version of Delta and the Bannermen 1,000 times before I will ever recommend someone sit down and watch Delta and the Bannermen. And that's all the time we have for today, or at least all the time Zoom will give us. I have been your guest for today's episode of Doctor Who Literature. My name is Melvin Pena. You can find me on the internet in a variety of locations, such as Blue Sky at Melvin Pena. You can find me on Instagram at Melvin2_Pena. Or my hub on the internet is about.me/Melvin Pena. That's MELVINPENA. Don't forget to keep turning the pages.
Doctor Who, Delta, and the Bannerman, or Bannermen, written by Malcolm Cole, televised as Delta and the Bannermen, teleplay by Malcolm Cole, televised in November 1987, paperback release date January 19th, 1989, target book number 135, cover artist Alister Pearson. As the 10 billionth customers at a space tollport, the Doctor and Mel win the grand prize, a place on the fabulous 50s coach tour to Disneyland, planet Earth. Unfortunately, they don't quite make it there. Knocked off course by a wayward satellite, the coach party arrives instead at Shangri-La, a remote Welsh holiday camp. But the peace and quiet of the countryside are soon shattered by the arrival of an army of marauding Bannermen soldiers, led by the ruthless Gavrock. They are tracking down Delta, the last of the Shimmeron, with only one thought in mind: her destruction. In terms of the target Doctor Who novelization paperbacks, we are up to the year 1989. This is one of those formative years for me. The year I turned 16, a magic number in the American growth cycle. The year I had my first job at a long-defunct movie theater. My first girlfriend. The year I took the first of the American college entrance exams, the PSAT. This is in many ways the first year that young Jason became current Jason. It is also the last year of the classic series. As you may have guessed over the past year, Doctor Who is not always item number one of importance in my life. That was equally true for me in the late 1980s as it is in 2025. Back in episode 127, our Time and the Ronnie episode, I would have talked about how much the March 1988 airing of that episode on my local PBS station was one of the crisis points of my Doctor Who fandom, a faith-breaking moment. And then my PBS station didn't air the rest of season 24 until about a year later. So when I bought the Delta novelization in early 1989, more out of habit than out of love at that point, it actually helped repair that breach in my fandom. In short, as a teenage boy, I loved this book. Well, parts of it. I didn't like seeing Murray and the rest of the Navarinos go. But I love the idea that the TARDIS could travel to Disneyland in 1959. Now, of course, it doesn't. The micro-budget the BBC would have allotted to the classic series in its dying days couldn't even buy you an e-ticket for Disneyland in 1959. While we didn't call them holiday camps in the States, my mother did grow up summering in the Jewish Catskills, where the 1987 movie Dirty Dancing is set, and I spent 2 or 3 summers in the dying remains of those same Catskills resorts, which were all but done by 1989, so I had an innate sense of what Shangri-La would have looked and felt like, even if the Welsh version of a holiday camp would have served fewer bagels or pickles and matzo ball soup. And I love the large number of human elements in the story. More than many other classic series episodes, Delta and the Bannermen is not necessarily about its plot, but about how the characters in it interact with one another. It is a sentimental love story. Now, in a world of Billies and Deltas, I was an American high school student in the 1980s. I was very much a Ray, and there are Americans in this story, which is always an underrepresented demographic in Doctor Who. Hawk and Weissmuller may be idiots, but Jerome P. Weissmuller, played on TV by Stubby K, real name Bernard Kotzen of New York City, New York, is one of the few Jewish-coded characters of the classic series, so this novelization would have spoken to me in all the ways that Time and the Ronnie did not. Of course, the books that you love at age 15 are books that embarrass you when you're 20. When I joined Recart's Doctor Who as a college student in the early 90s, I mentioned in a post how much I'd enjoyed this book, and the TV story was not very popular on RADW in the early 90s, I had to account for that opinion, and I wasn't very successful in answering John Blum's challenges. Of course, no hard feelings. John has been a guest on the show several times and will be again, but that was the last time I said nice things about the Delta novelization in public for many years. But looking back, reading it now, I do like it, in part because of where I was when I bought it almost 37 years ago. Now it benefits from having short chapters, 32 of them, which, given how much of American bookstores and libraries have been conquered by the James Patterson Great Automatic Grammatizator, short chapters are in these days. The book also gives us a lovely introduction to Sylvester McCoy's Doctor, who of course at that point I'd only seen for about the first 50 minutes of Time and the Ronnie in movie format. Quote, "Of all his multifarious incarnations, this was one of the nicest." Now, that's a road not taken by seasons 25 and 26. One thing that Delta and the Bannermen has that you would think the author would do differently are these potentially cheesy nature metaphors. We'll call them PCNMs. Quote, "The toll port hovered in space like a gigantic dandelion." No, it didn't, at least not on TV. Or, quote, "She was put in mind of the sparrow, trying to sharpen its beak on the rock of time." Now, there are lots more of those to come. Ken Dodd is described as a, quote, "scaly alien." I suppose there wasn't the budget for that, although Dodd's great book of British smiles, facial expression, perhaps says more than an expensive makeup conversion could have done. Now, Cole is not just a fan of PCNMs, but also of silly space names. Chapter 4 has Mel remember the soul turns, the guy box, and I swear I am not making this up, the wormies. Now, Cole clearly has his view on the far corners of the Doctor Who universe, but unlike Robert Holmes, he seems to prefer gag names to serious world building. Cole also likes to capitalize words to achieve maximum emphasis, which I find a bit amateurish. In Chapter 2, we learn that the Bannermen polluted their own planet, which is why they want to slaughter the Shimmeron. This is one of the more overt bits of political subtext in the story, so welcome to the show, Andrew Cartmel. Had this come in Season 26, perhaps that plot thread would have been more greatly developed, instead of reserved for the novelization only. What's nice is that the book has extra room to breathe. The TV serial, which I think suffers from the 3-part format, is at a breakneck pace, with all sorts of extra scenes and dialogue and character moments lost for timing. The book is based on Cole's rehearsal scripts, and it restores all those moments. Although sometimes the material added to the scripts by the actors and director on the day of is better off left omitted, Ken Dodd's comedy run before getting killed by Gavrok is thankfully not preserved in the book. Chapter 15 opens with the mother of all PCNMs, quote, "Dawn insinuated its rosy fingers between the cabins, driving the last feathers of mist into the sky." I believe that's a mixed metaphor, in fact. Now, I thought that was the mother of all PCNMs, but then I got to the first paragraph of Chapter 16, after which I longed for the insular naivete of my life when I was still living in Chapter 15. Quote, "The water lay like a sheet of clear glass, glistening in the early morning sun." Chapter 16 is also where we meet Garanwi, the enigmatic Welsh beekeeper, whose every sentence is a reflection on the plot. Regrettably, Cole does not use the novelization to tell us who Garanwi really is. Stephen Moffat's pet theory is that Garanwi is a future incarnation of the Doctor, which makes a lot more sense after the events of the Timeless Children. But nothing in the book tells us what Cole had in mind, unless it was just whimsy for whimsy's sake. The script was clearly written when nobody knew what Sylvester McCoy was going to be like as an actor and performer in Doctor Who. In his big end of Part 2 confrontation with Gavrok, preserved here at the end of Chapter 23, the Doctor shouts and is, quote, "shaking with fury." Nope, not on TV. Cole does not spare us insights into other characters. We learn of Burton that psychology was, quote, currently a hobby of his, and that, quote, running a holiday camp gave him the opportunity to study all sorts of people. He also keeps an emergency supply of black market chocolate in his desk. Vinny, a young fellow on TV, in the book is wrinkly and served as Burton's Batman during World War II. Murray, the tubby Navarino bus driver, and I gotta tell you that Delta and the Bannermen is unique in Doctor Who for featuring a high proportion of tubby characters. Sleep's, quote, "the exhausted sleep of the hula hoop competition special award for effort winner." I was still hoping for Murray and company to be magically restored at the end of the book, and they were not. But I can delude myself into thinking that maybe the editors nixed a Chapter 33, in which they did exactly that. So that's my headcanon. If your headcanon is Pex lives, mine is Murray lives, with his special award for effort trophy. Now, not much can be done to rescue Hawk and Weissmuller. Without the stunt casting of Stubby K, these two are pretty unbearable in print, and they appear in more scenes, too. The plot ends early, with an extended denouement on TV, and the book goes on even longer, with a prolonged and whimsical epilogue detailing the happy lives of all the characters. Even the Bannermen, who establish a rug-weaving collective. I swear I'm not making that up. But, you know what? I love that ending. That is the optimistic view of human nature. Take away the scary, warmongering leader, and you'll find that his followers just want to live in peace and harmony and work with their hands. Doctor Who is going to get into some pretty dark places in seasons 25 and 26, and we'll read those books and critique some of those plot choices as they come up in the target rotation. But as far as the surviving Bannermen being allowed to have a happy ending without their horrible leader, that's optimism, and I'm here for it. As the closing song on Delta and the Bannermen's TV production goes, here's to the future.
Boy, you're the sorriest-looking bunch of Bannermen I've ever seen.
Thank you for your help and courage, all of you.
Are Billy and the Doctor all right?
Yes. Billy's just changing.
I know without a male the race will be wiped out. But I haven't seen many examples of species crossing that could be the most dreadful mutation.
It's our only chance, Doctor.
I can't condone this foolishness. But then, love has never been known for its rationality.
And then you see the new young queen comes along, and the whole colony swarms all around her, and off they go to find a new hive.
What do we talk about when we don't talk about Doctor Who? For much of 2025, I have not been talking about Doctor Who, but the days are still 24 hours long. I still have a clock to punch, and a kid to raise, and things I need to read on the subway, and streaming services whose monthly fees I need to justify by using them, like Netflix. But Netflix is not just a monthly fee anymore. Living in New York City as I do, I have other demands on my time imposed by the good people at Netflix corporate headquarters in the San Francisco Bay Area, 3,000 miles from home, or, according to Google Maps, 2,943 miles from home. Netflix, for example, now produces a Broadway show, a Stranger Things prequel, which I will actually be seeing in a few days with one of my non-Doctor Who friends. And Netflix also operates a movie theater in Manhattan, the Paris Theater, just off Central Park on West 58th Street, one of the last of the great single-screen movie theaters, and the only one still in the 5 boroughs of NYC. My mother used to go to the Paris a lot in the 1960s. It fell on hard times, as many movie theaters have done, but Netflix took over the lease in 2019, the last in a long line of operators, beginning with Pathé Cinema in 1948. Marlene Dietrich presided over the original ribbon cutting, and to be honest, Netflix is doing great things with the Paris Theater. They premiere original Netflix movies and often bring in directors and actors and historians to host their screenings. Just this year alone, I've been happy to see in person Guillermo del Toro introduce the new Frankenstein, Catherine Bigelow introduce her new movie, A House of Dynamite, which co-stars Jonah Hauer-King of this last season of TV Doctor Who, and of course my Brooklyn neighbors John Turturro and Steve Buscemi showed up to discuss Miller's Crossing. Netflix also uses the theater to screen a lot of old-time movies that you can't stream on their platform. And earlier this year, they used the Paris to run an Alfred Hitchcock Film Festival. 59 films, screening over the course of a couple of months, more than half of those by the master of suspense himself, and the other films in the series, films that inspired him, or were inspired by him, or which gently lampooned him. So in the spring and early summer of this year, I found myself spending a lot of time at the Paris, watching old Hitchcock films that I hadn't seen yet. Now, of course, my ability to stay awake during movies has not improved, on the wrong side of age 50, and I'd like to tell you that I didn't fall asleep 3 different times during Rear Window, but I could never lie to you. Seeing both The Lady Vanishes and its non-Hitchcock demi-sequel, Night Train to Munich, as part of a double feature, was one of the best days of the year for me. I mean, who even does single-ticket double features anymore? And one afternoon, when I decided that I had enough time in my schedule to flex out of work for a few hours and finish up later in the evening, I went uptown to watch a screening of 2 episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. That's $17 a ticket. That was $8.50 per episode, which is not nearly as cheap as DVD box sets of classic AHP, or to watch them free on ad-supported streaming services. But the communal experience of watching these 2 episodes with a couple dozen other New Yorkers beats watching alone on the small screen. Because, to bring this full circle, I wasn't just watching Doctor Who as a teen in the 80s. Sci-fi and horror and mystery anthology TV series were all over the airwaves in the 1980s. If you travel back in time, you won't just find Doctor Who on PBS, but you'll find the original Twilight Zone, the 1985 revival of Twilight Zone, New York City's own Tales from the Dark Side, a Friday the 13th TV series, Amazing Stories, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents, original series and classic remakes, hosted by the then 5 years deceased Hitch himself, via recycled and colorized host segments from the 1950s. I made it a point to watch new AAHP reruns on the USA Network on Saturday nights after Doctor Who had aired in PBS earlier in the day. While I won't say that the revival was as groundbreaking as the original, mostly because it was remakes from the classic series, it did a marvelous job of using old-time actors as episode leads. Even as a young teen, I was able to recognize E.G. Marshall from 12 Angry Men, starring in the role of a reluctant hospital patient, irked by a cheery nurse in The Impatient Patient, and as an adult Brooklynite now, I am ashamed to have not recognized Eli Wallach in Kandinsky's Vault. One of my favorite bits of watching the AAHP revival on Saturday nights, instead of dating or hanging out with friends or doing whatever normal junior high school kids did in 1986 and 1987, was the opening theme, Funeral March of a Marionette. That was an old piece when it first became associated with Alfred Hitchcock, but now, of course, you never say one name without the other. I am thrilled and elated that Jim Sangster has used it as background for his very Hitchcockian introduction to this week's episode. With that being said, we will see you in 2 weeks as we do battle with one of the last William Hartnell stories, as we do battle with the first story, directed by Michael Ferguson, one of the classic series' great young directors, as we do battle with the War Machines. Thank you for joining me on Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer is David Barsky. Each episode is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed, and our YouTube channel is run by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Melvin Pena. This podcast can be found on your podcast app of choice, with all past episodes at creators.spotify.com/pod/show/DoctorWhoLit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
But please take care, Mrs. Remington. Lady Painfort knows more than you know. It's all part of the master plan. Ella, Ace, hanging from his umbrella. Ella, Ace, oh no, you've activated light. He can't stop until the survey's done. Time traveling, yeah.